All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here this afternoon to the third installment of Tempe Accelerates. This is an opportunity for the various work teams who are working on performance measures in their areas to share with the rest of the organization what they're doing and to offer themselves up for feedback, comments, ways that they can potentially improve and perhaps strategies they hadn't thought of before. That's really what this is about. This is based upon a model that's been used in other organizations that have embraced strategic management like we are and have been for the last year and a half. And the idea is transparency to offer the opportunity for all levels of the organization to come together and to support each other in this process. Council sets the priorities, the departments working together create performance measures. From those performance measures leads to strategies, and hearing about those measures and strategies and trying to then collect outcomes, data-driven outcomes, is really what this is all about. And so today we're excited to have a couple. We're going to be talking about tree density, and we're going to be talking about homelessness. And so we're going to have about 10 minutes per presentation, leaving about 20 minutes for all of you to ask questions and to offer feedback. I would remind everyone that we are taping this afternoon, so if you are going to comment or ask a question, wait until the microphone comes to you so that way it can be recorded. So without further ado, I'd invite the council priority number 4.11 folks to come forward, and we'll start the program.
No, yeah, okay. Do you want to take care of getting the slides? Good afternoon, everyone. We're here to talk about tree density. My name is Bonnie Richardson, Craig Hagan, and Sean Thompson. I'll go to the next one. Okay. So our performance measure is number 4.11, to achieve a tree canopy of 25 trees per acre on our as an average on our city properties. Okay. So why does that measure matter? Well, shade matters, and it especially matters in a city like Tempe in Arizona, where we have such high heat and we are experiencing increasing temperatures. If we engage in providing more trees, we have an opportunity to cool our neighborhoods and to help people be healthy by creating an atmosphere where they can go out more of the year in order to walk or ride their bike or exercise. So you can see a few other things on the slide as well, looking at conserving water, healthy community. Okay. What does 25 trees per acre look like? And you will notice sometimes you see this as 25% tree canopy, which was the original nomenclature. And we are using 25 trees per acre because that gives us an opportunity to count our trees and to look at all of the acreage of the city properties and know what we have ahead of us. Of course, we're not just looking at planting trees, but we're also looking at taking care of our existing trees. So we have to be sure we use best practices. We've learned a lot through our urban forestry master plan and from other cities. So we need to be sure we're taking care of all of our trees. So here's current status. We are using an iTree-based software at this time, and we are able to capture the numbers of trees that we have. We have not completed that yet. We've done most of our parks, some of our right-of-way, but we haven't yet addressed facilities or some of the other larger parks like Rio Salado Park. We're looking at this holistically because it touches so many areas. So you can see some of the other council directives that we have. And of course, providing shade in the right place with the right tree in the right place will help us joint venture with other people who are working on these other priorities as well. This tree gauge shows you the number of trees that we had when we first did our study. That was done on a 2010 map view of Tempe. So it is not the most current data, and of course, we're working now to collect more data. Unfortunately, even though we are at approximately 13.4%, and we want to get to 25%, we are today losing trees. We're losing more trees than we're adding. So even that 2010 number may be different when we actually have our inventory completed in terms of how many trees we have per acre.
All right, good evening or afternoon, everyone. Sean Thompson and I are going to talk through the specific strategies that we have of really how do we get to the goal of 25 trees per acre. And between us and the areas and the teams and the crews that we manage, we probably oversee 95% of the trees within the city. So it was going to be a good opportunity for us to come, because we're the ones, as we work with Bonnie on the overall plan, to actually put the performance measure, to see what's behind this performance measure and actually talk through those steps that are going to actually get us there. So as Bonnie mentioned, this first strategy that we have is an inventory of all locations. We want to really migrate the first bullet, which is build on the existing baseline, which was percentage based, into a really static number, which is how many trees per acre you have. With that, you obviously just need to know how many trees you have and how many acres. It's not this growing and reducing canopy coverage based on age that can come across as a percentage as you do these mapping inventories. So what we want to do is take a hard line look at our inventory as it relates specifically to fixed assets and trees, and then fixed assets and the amount of space that we actually manage. So it seems really easy. This is a pretty cut and dry one, trees per acre. But the first step really is making sure that we actually develop this inventory so we can actually know where we are migrating over from a percentage base over actually to a trees per acre base. And I'll turn it over to Sean for the cost and the management piece of it.
Well, what's great is trees are the one asset that the city has that gains value. So the question is, the original $300 investment of the 24-inch box that we just planted, how do we get it to the $20,000 30-foot tree with a beautiful canopy? And there's many stages is going through. When we first plant the tree, we stake the tree. We want to make sure that it keeps up on an upright, straight arrow. You know, through time and for its first year or second year, until it gets mature, it counts on what type of tree we have. And so you're constantly readjusting the ties and reestablishing it, and also if the irrigation is working properly. Is the clock working properly? Are we getting enough water? Is it not getting enough water? Does the tree need does it need to be fertilized? Inspection of the tree. Are we going out there and seeing what's going on with the tree? Cleaning up after the tree. So anybody that's ever had a pine tree and that's a tree, it's not a clean tree. So constantly maintaining that area around the tree. And number one thing, properly trimming the trees. Structurally trimming and thinning the trees to the objectives of what we want that tree to do. Secondly, moving into the infrastructure. Our infrastructure inside our right-of-ways are through the parks. Our irrigations are old. So are they going to handle these volumes of trees coming in there? What do we need to do? Continue the planning program. Chances are sometimes we do lose some trees through age of the tree, disease, storm damage, and we're covering costs for that. And creating a design for these areas that we know where the trees are, where we're placing them, and we're placing them in the areas where they need to go. We're placing them where there's not an issue of line of sight or there's power lines underneath that we can get the best for the shade canopy. I'll pass it on to Craig.
Great. So moving on to the final piece, the implementation stage. So after we've identified how many trees per acre we actually have, and we need to then know how many trees we actually need to place in the ground, and we've identified what the costs are for not just the installation of trees, but also for the ongoing maintenance, which may be the most important piece of maintaining what you've actually got first. As you can see from this slide here, from our final implementation or strategy on implementation, is everything is bookended by making sure that we've got accurate records of finalizing the inventory of what's out in the field. And then as we go through all of these steps, we're going to make sure that at the end, we're actually updating everything as we're going along as well, so that we don't get in the same position where we are now. So the timelines and projections, just making sure that we've got an action plan. If 25 trees per acre is our goal, we want to make sure that we actually pace this throughout the years so that we don't, in 4 or 5 years, have trees that are all the same age that we're going to be replacing in 30, 40 years when they reach the end of their lifespan. As Sean mentioned previously, we want to make sure that we've taken into consideration every maintenance detail and management of a tree before we actually implement anything within the ground, as well as securing some of the infrastructure and the funding that actually needs to support those trees. What seems like the no-brainers, then we get to do the fun part, which is actually putting the trees in the ground, whether that's internally as part of some of the ongoing capital improvement projects we've got, or partnering with the community through volunteer programs, which is a really great way to actually get buy-in from the community itself. Finally, we want to make sure that we're actually, or not finally, but next, almost last, we want to make sure that we're actually getting the word out on what we're doing. This is to the community so that they can hopefully see some of the benefits of what we're able to do so that we can show that we're being good stewards, and then hopefully promote within businesses, and then also for individuals, homeowners in Tempe, so that they would follow our lead as well. We want to create a dashboard so that we know where we're at through the entire process. And then, as I mentioned, we want to make sure that we're actively managing our database so that we can tell at any point where we are and what we actually need to do moving forward. But any good plan, even though it has 3 clearly laid out strategies, unfortunately has its challenges along the way. And I'll turn it over to Bonnie to talk about the fun piece at the end.
So I'll make this part brief. We know what we need to do. We are already working to make improvements, whether it's how we place our irrigation, how we stake the trees, and I can't emphasize enough this right tree, right place. But there has been some confusion about, it's exciting to start the new pieces, but we still have to go back and take care of what we've got. And our irrigation systems are in disrepair. At the library, we'll be going in and entirely replacing the irrigation there in order to sustain our trees. The urban heat island is a very important issue, and it's astounding how much you really can make a difference in your community by planting trees in shade. So living infrastructure has costs just like every other kind of infrastructure, and it needs the care and maintenance to help that tree mature so that we get the full value of the tree for our efforts. And if there are any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Questions, comments, feedback for the group? Alex? Let's wait till the microphone comes to you.
Hello. My first question to you would be, have you collected data on areas that still need shade due to, like you're saying, the urban heat island? The reason I ask is because I know there was a news article a couple months ago that an ASU student was collecting data on areas that were temperature-wise that could use shade. Are you still continuing to do collaboration, and have you collected that data?
We are collaborating. Through the Arizona U.S. Forestry Office, they have put out a map online, and we can provide the link for you, and it identifies the heat island areas across our region, Maricopa County. And when you look at that, there are a lot of areas that are dark red and orange, and those are the areas where they are saying it's a priority to plant trees first. There are some areas identified in Tempe as well. So we take that kind of data along with other things that we're learning through research with ASU. One of our tree plantings actually has a research piece of identifying the cool factor of different ways you plant trees, whether they're in a bosque or they're lining a sidewalk. And I will say that one of the more important things is to be sure we're shading hardscape. That's why shading sidewalks and streets protects the materials, but also really makes it much cooler.
Standing right there. Thanks, guys. This is great. You had mentioned sort of private residence and whatnot. Is there any sort of hope now down the line to a partnership with either residents or commercial to sort of encourage planting on their own?
Fortune, the council will adopt our urban forestry master plan. In that plan, we talk about some possible programs and opportunities we might take, because I think education is really important for our citizens and businesses to understand the value of trees. I think in the long term, we want to partner with people who live in Tempe. And again, some of our institutions already have programs in place to plant more trees. But first step in our program is to be sure we repair infrastructure, take care of removing dead trees, pruning existing, and then also getting new trees in the ground.
Well, first, as a resident and employee here, I think what you're doing is great. You mentioned how you use iTree software and have Canopy Data from 2010. Is there any move to use some sort of updated LiDAR data or something to look at updated tree canopy on a more frequent schedule?
We are going to be working with Stephanie and developing, first we have to get better numbers. That's critical. But also other cities have done programs where they even have citizens are able to upload when they plant a tree on their street. And of course, that's not the kind of rigorous data that we want to collect on city properties, but it does get people connected and feel they're making a difference and they're a part of an active community. So we're open to all sorts of software that will better help us visualize and others visualize the challenges and then how well we're doing over time.
Put up on the screen there, is that the where we are right now? If you go to the website, this is what you'll see as we track it.
To finalize exactly how we're going.
My question is, do you have some sort of a formula on how many trees you should be planting to compensate for those that you know are dying? And then are you going to reach a point where you're proactively, when you see a tree is dying, go ahead and plant so that it can be replaced, but not necessarily taking out a whole row of trees because they're dying, but plant some in between and then remove the dead trees over time?
We're going to be doing that in Spab Park next weekend. We are planting some smaller trees between some large mulberries that are aging and not looking all that healthy. So if we give those new trees 3 or 4 years before we have to take down the others, it's not such an abrupt scraping of the ground, so to speak. And yeah, we have, there are a lot of best practices now. Many cities are doing this, and so we do want to be proactive in how we replace trees. Currently, we could be facing somewhere between 300 and 400 trees a year on all of our properties that we are losing. Those numbers really vary. A couple of years ago, we had a heavy storm and lost 200 trees just down around the lake. So we have to try to estimate to handle storm damage and unusual events while also evaluating how old our trees are getting and how many spots we have where we don't have a tree in the ground.
The other piece of that is making sure that we have accurate data and actually tracking how many trees we're actually losing in real time. So that's something that our team has been working through with the software that we have to actually identify not just where we're losing trees, but which ones are storm related, and then if there's any reason where we think we're losing some of the trees so we can try to keep it from happening again. So I think a lot of it really has to do with the data, trying to forecast how many we have, and then trying to keep up, as Bonnie mentioned, where you have a really bad storm event. I remember back in 2008, I came in one Friday morning, we ended up losing 400 trees with a microburst that hit in the downtown area one night. So the 200 sounds a lot until you compare it to a bigger storm that you can recall. And it's really tough to plan for the 400, but I know that we have some mechanisms in place in downtown and then also within the parks to identify some replacements, but we really need good numbers, and we're just really beginning that piece with some of the software that we've got. And I think that we can hopefully figure out where those averages are so that we can start planning to those. Very good question.
How did you establish your target of 25? Why was that an important value?
So with the 25 trees per acre, I can speak a bit to it. We tried to identify a number that was close to that, knowing that was already an accepted number. And we figured if a tree is on average 25, at a mature height or mature size, 25 feet in diameter, if you work the math out, you get about 28%. So assuming that a tree is going to be within its range, it was as close to, a round number, 25 trees per acre was close to 25%. That we thought it was a really good medium, knowing that you're going to have trees in different age. But just moving it from this dynamic going up and down based on how trees are growing, moving away from a percentage to trees per acre. At full maturity, it's going to get us beyond 25%, but we know that there are going to be trees in different stages. So, and in different parks, they're based on the irrigation type, you're going to reach, and we believe that 25 foot diameter was about an average. If you've got a mesquite that could be 35, 40 feet in diameter versus more of a columnar tree, it was a fairly good representation. So,
I think the percentage, 25%, was actually after we were showing the council what could be done for this urban forestry plan. And there are a number of cities, including Phoenix, that had already set a 25% goal. It is a very challenging goal, no kidding. So we're going to have to really work hard to make that. But we've got good opportunities, and I think the team knows how to do it.
Just so we're clear, we're talking strictly about city property, right? Parks, city facilities, rights of way. What are we at right now there, best estimate? What's our number?
It's approximately 19,000.
I mean, in terms of your goal, 25 per acre.
Well, we need another, what did we have up there, 15,000? I think what it was, yeah.
So
we're at about 17 per acre right now. Okay.
Yeah, and that doesn't count a lot of the really open space parks, like a sports field heavy area, golf course, Diablo Stadium. So this is, again, we need accurate inventories, not just on trees, but acreage, and that's as we work through that piece. We feel confident with the information that we have on the areas that we've already done the data collection on. There were about 17, understanding that some of the larger areas that have more open space because they're more sports field related are going to probably skew those numbers down a bit when we actually get that data collected. And then
the fact that we don't have all of our parks calculated. So Rio Salado is likely to have a lot more trees when we get done with our planning for that park. There are some other parks in any of our desert area parks where we need to get a handle on the numbers of what's out there and where we want to enhance and where we just want to leave it and take care of it.
So I just wanted to, Stephanie asked me not to speak. She does not want to speak, but I wanted to show the great work Craig is alluding to, and Bonnie and Sean. The data is very important. And I love this example for everyone to see because it showcases that we all don't have all the data that we need to make decisions in this organization sometimes. So this is a great example of building the information so we make the decisions. So this is something that they are working on with Stephanie and her group to complete the data of what trees we do have, the health condition of those trees, as they allude to, that some are dying faster than we can replace them. But this is a top of mapping that would take place with the parks and our infrastructure as we gather that data. And that allows the team that is planting the trees and the people like Craig and Bonnie making the decisions as far as what's next. So I just wanted to highlight as an example of how we are gathering the data, that we all don't need to have all the complete data, and I think that shows the human side of things for people to think about what else could we be helping each other gather information from department to department that helps us make better decisions in our own departments.
Any questions? I'm just curious, if you added in the non-city property within the jurisdiction of Tempe, how would that affect the overall number? Would it bring it down significantly? Do you have any idea? I mean, because obviously, the more trees you have, the tree doesn't care what type of property it's planted on, it's going to have an effect.
Well, again, the overall average is about 13.4%, or it was when we calculated it. And, you know, people choose to walk in places where it's cooler, so our flood irrigated neighborhoods do have a lot more of the larger trees and the shade trees. And we have a few islands where we don't have trees yet. So we want to be equitable as well in how we go out in our parks and add new trees.
And in terms of calculation, I think Craig alluded to it. I mean, there are areas within city parks and other facilities where they have to, by necessity, be open space. You know, if you have a ball field, you're not going to plant a tree in it, right? So is that something that could affect the way we measure?
Well, I think when you go to most parks, there's no shady place to sit and watch the game. So some of what we're doing is looking at how to make it comfortable for the parents and everybody else who wants to come watch and play soccer. And there seems to be still quite an area where we can work. Some parks will be less than 25, but some will be greater. So we're looking to have a strong average. The other thing is that most of our parks don't have trees shading the sidewalks where people come to the parks. So we can set a good example for those neighborhoods as well as making it more comfortable for them to get to the park.
I think, Andrew, that's a great question, because we've heard from residents recently that open space is almost an additional amenity in the park, to where trees are seen as such a valuable thing, but you've got to balance it out with even non-sports field open space and really allowing a place to play with Frisbee, anything else that could be used. Along with that, just making sure that we're also not just planting the same trees size-wise, but going for diversity in size of trees. And I don't mean that you plant the same tree at a different size, but you're actually planting a variety of trees that could only get to 15 feet in diameter to complement the ones that are 40. And I think that we really need to find that balance. We've been pretty restricted just geographically on the types of trees we've been able to plant. And we've added some in, and some trees have worked, some trees haven't, but it's really just looking for really creative ways, as Bonnie mentions, shading sidewalks, but also taking credit for the smaller trees that we're planting along with the larger ones as well, and trying to maximize through appropriate design what we're actually doing.
Okay, thank you. Oh, got one in the back, and then no, we got to get you on, or else the taping will be incomplete. We'll say, I wonder what that question was, but we'll hear the answer.
I know that with the increase of the trees that you're going to be planting, it's going to create a larger demand of water throughout the city. So can you speak briefly to the water conservation methods that you're going to be implementing as you plant these trees?
Sure. We typically are using drip irrigation, and now when we're planting, we put more than one drip. We are putting 3 to 6. So we can stretch those out as we want to have the roots expand so they can support the tree. And this goes back again to that right tree, right place. There are some areas where we could plant desert trees that actually, after the first 9 months to a year, could get by with no water. And then there are some varieties that do need more water. So if we do have flood irrigation, it's a great place to put those trees that may be more needy. And yet on other areas, we want to be sure we're minimizing the impact on the water. But the trees also hold moisture with the rain. They create a different ecosystem. And so it helps to keep things growing and minimize the amount of water we need as those trees get larger.
Yeah, because eventually, if you have a large tree that's got turf underneath it, you're watering the turf under it less. And if there's ever water shortages, as Bonnie mentioned with drip irrigation, we want to make sure that we have that infrastructure so that we can continue to actually keep the trees watered appropriately. But we know it's a balance, but also understanding that there are so many benefits to adding trees, the appropriate trees in the appropriate places, that it also, I think, can aid in water conservation in different ways. But just making sure that we're taking that into consideration with the heat island, the cooling that we're providing for it. But I think it's a net gain, which is, I think, what we're looking for from an environmental perspective, but also making sure that understanding that from the water conservation side is that we're not just utilizing spray emitters, but we're actually using drip emitters, so we want to make sure that we're watering appropriately, regardless of what we're watering.
We also have a working relationship with several other agencies and conservation groups and work closely with the Forestry Service. So as new ideas develop, we're certainly going to be there to take advantage of that.
Right. Very good. I appreciate it. Thank you. Well done. All right. We will head right into our next presentation regarding homelessness. Go ahead and have the speakers introduce themselves and take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kim Van Nieuwenhoven, and I'm the Homeless Solutions Coordinator. And Paul is here to help me answer questions and to support me. So we're going to start out today. Here we go. Oops. The council priority for this area of ending homelessness is quality of life. That's priority 3. The performance measure reads like this: to achieve an end to homelessness in Tempe as measured by Tempe's annual counts. So we all know how complicated an issue homelessness is. And there are lots of reasons for that. One of the big ones, I think, is that when we talk about homelessness, we're talking about many of the most pervasive and troubling social issues in our society that are encompassed with homelessness. So we're talking about hunger, we're talking about deep poverty, we are talking about people with serious mental illness, we're talking about disparity, we're talking about economic injustice, we're talking about some pretty serious kinds of social issues. And not just those issues, but we're also talking about a very wide variety of people who are experiencing homelessness in our community, across the board, completely. And I just want to remind you, too, that these people are experiencing homelessness. It's something that's happening to them. It's a temporary situation. It is not who they are. Because who they are is very, very complex, just as the reasons that brought them to homelessness are complex. So in our community, in Tempe, right now, we know some things that are unfortunate. One of them is that we talked to the homeless school liaisons, and they tell us last year in Tempe schools, there were just over 500 children who were experiencing homelessness in Tempe. About 250 of them were in the high school, And I can tell you that a number of those teenagers were aging out of foster care and moving right into homelessness over the summer. We have families in Tempe, many of them who grew up here, started their own families here, and are now homeless. And they are living in places not meant for human habitation. Now, I'm not talking about living in a hotel or doubled up, but they're living in places not meant for human habitation, and they are waiting weeks and even months to get into shelter. And we have hundreds of individuals, men and women, who are pretty much literally, many of them, completely alone in the world. And they have serious mental illness, and they have chronic physical and health conditions and disabilities, and they're trying to function in what for a large part of our year is just brutal weather. We also have domestic violence survivors leaving with nothing at all. We have our veterans who are having trouble with keeping their jobs because of post-traumatic stress disorder. And unfortunately, really a growing number of elderly people. I get calls at the office who are saying things like, my husband's died, they're raising the rent, I don't know what to do, please help me, I don't know how to be homeless. So we have that full spectrum, really, of suffering. And if that's not enough to want to end homelessness, we know from the U.S. Interagency Council on Ending Homelessness that sometimes it can be more expensive to allow people to remain homeless on the streets than to house them. So they're looking at many cities, and they're saying the cost is between $30,000 to $50,000 to allow someone who is chronically homeless, and I'll remind you that HUD definition is 1 year or longer, or they've had the experience of homelessness 4 times in the last 3 years. Some of those folks are then, we've talked about this before, they're going through our very expensive public systems, cycling in and out of them. So if we house them, it can be the fiscally responsible thing to do as well. So for all of those reasons and many more, our target is to have no person experiencing homelessness. We're not talking about managing homelessness. We're not talking about making it or reducing the number of people homeless. What we need to do is to provide an integrated system of housing and services that is focused on stable and permanent housing outcomes. Housing outcomes all the time. From the first moment our outreach team meets a person, we're looking at how to get them housed. So we have some data, important data elements here that I want to talk about that we know. HUD requires us every January to do a point-in-time count. This count happens from 5 a.m. to 12 noon. And put on your calendars this year, it's going to be January 23rd. Last January, we went out there. We scoured the whole city. We had about 75 volunteers, and we found 202 unsheltered people on that day, and that point in time. Now, I kind of expected that probably isn't the full scope and scale of our problem, so we were able, through the mid-year supplemental process, to go out once again for 16 weeks and to really just survey people and try and understand what was going on out there. And there were 629 unduplicated people who were unsheltered at that time. These are important elements, but these 2 data points are not going to inform us of what we need to do strategy-wise. It doesn't give us enough information. And if the number 202 would go down this year, it could go down because it's so cold and we didn't get enough volunteers to go out, right? Fortunately, we do have a lot of other data elements that we can collect and are collecting, beginning to collect some of them, are collecting now. And these are indicators. So we want to see those annual counts go down. But we also want to know that when a person gets to a point of service in Tempe, through outreach and through some of our partner agencies, how long does it take them to get housed? And we want that number to decrease so that people aren't spending a long time homeless in our city. And we want to look at the number of people we're serving, because if that number goes up, we need to analyze, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And we need to know how many new people are coming in, because if we have many new people coming in, we need to know why and where are they coming from. Maybe they're coming from the justice system, maybe they're being released from jails and prisons to homelessness, then that's where we need to place our strategies. We want to look at the most important thing, how many people are permanently housed. We want to look at, are they stably housed? Are they coming back into the system? Are they losing their housing after a year, after 6 months? And then also, very important, we want to know how many people are we diverting from homelessness? How many people are we preventing from ever going into that system? So with all those indicators, we're looking at how is our system, how is it working? Is it healthy? And what areas need more attention than others? So, are people going to be homeless in Tempe until we end it? Yes. But until that time, let's make sure that if a person experiences homelessness in Tempe, that it is a rare experience, that we do not have those young people aging out of foster care going to become homeless. That's a rare event, and it should be. And that it's brief, so that individuals are not spending years homeless in Tempe and living in Papago Park or wherever they do, but they are having a brief experience of homelessness. And then lastly, it's one time. And we want those families who have to experience homelessness for it to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. That's enough. The performance measures will be collected in a number of different ways. We have so many partners here. This job is so big. So we'll be looking at reporting through our Homelessness Management Information System. That's a federal database that we'll be using all across Maricopa County. Very important. Those numbers go directly to HUD. It matters in our funding. We have the City of Tempe service provider reporting through Tempe Community Council. We have the Human Services internal spreadsheet reporting, so CARE 7, the Housing Department, the HOPE outreach team. And then we have interdepartmental City of Tempe activity, as we're doing with right now with PD, with Public Works, with the courts, trying to collect all of that information. And then we have stakeholders, outside in the larger community, those collective impact folks, the Maricopa Association of Governments, Mercy Maricopa Behavioral Health Authority. They're helping us house seriously mentally ill people. We mentioned the Tempe Public Schools, and then Tempe and the county court data. So I'm just going to highlight 3 strategies here that we're working on. The first is to enhance access to existing services in order to prevent and reduce the length of time people are homeless. Talked a little bit about that. One good example of that is that this year we are now, Tempe is an access point to our regional coordinated entry. What does that mean? It means somebody homeless in Tempe can now go through this process and can have vouchers to move them anywhere in Maricopa County. They're not Tempe vouchers, they're our community's vouchers. We will prioritize ending chronic homelessness. We talked a lot about that since I've been here in this last year, and doing amazing work collectively. I'll speak a little bit more about that in a second. And then to align our resources and programs that offer measurable results. So just last month, the Human Services, Police Department, and Public Works went together to the council and asked for collective funding to work on specifically the encampment issues that we're having. But we're finding that the encampment conversation grows and grows beyond just the desert parks and Papago. And all of this funding, honestly, will not just help those unsheltered people, but will help many other types of homeless people or subsets. So what can we do to accelerate this measure? We are doing these things now, but we could be doing them faster. And so I'll just go through a few of them again that I think are important. The first one is that we need to increase affordable housing. As I haven't said it enough, housing will take that person out of this situation. We won't be having to deal with the encampment when they're housed. Funding rapid rehousing, which is an intervention that works with the person to give them time-limited services and assistance in their housing. So it could mean that we have met people out on the street who have an income but can never get together enough money for their first or last month's rent. So we can help them with that. We can do some budgeting work with them, and maybe in 2 or 3 months, they're self-sustainable. They're on their own. And then I'll just say increase of flexible funding, because again, this complex issue requires that we be very creative sometimes and figure out how we can leverage and move the resources that we need. People sometimes need very, very small things. Just yesterday, we met with the homeless school liaison who said to us, she's working with a family who had lost their housing because of $50. If they had had that $50, they would not have become homeless. And now they have an eviction on their record, and now it's harder for them to find housing that they can even get into. With flexible funding, we can help people like that. So I think I'll just close by saying that we believe that if we are monitoring the Tempe homeless response system, and we're really looking at it, and we are making data-driven decisions and really difficult prioritizations, we really can end homelessness in Tempe. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Questions? Don't be shy. Or be shy.
I think you did a really great presentation, and it especially made me aware of the compassionate side of homelessness, so thanks. I understand that we do have a portion of people who choose to be homeless or who do not want to be housed. I think sometimes that may be the younger people, or they move between Boulder and Tempe and recycle. How are you going to approach that challenge?
That's a great and a very difficult question. I just want to say first that I'm willing to open my mind, but as someone who's worked with homeless people for a very long time, I have to say that I personally have never met anyone who really wanted to be homeless. If you have a chance to really talk to them, what they don't want is to fail again, or to be responsible, or to stop using drugs. But they do want to be housed. So that is a population that is very difficult to get to. It's about persistence, and it's about respect usually, and it's about offering them the service that they need and are ready for. So the idea of housing first means that instead of like, okay then, let's just get you inside, and then we start to do the real work of healing you, of helping you to see what the next step is. Now, are there traveling young people? Yes, there are. And I think that sometimes, again, I'm learning so much working with PD that sometimes it honestly gets to the point where the behavior has to stop, and we're enabling people. So we don't want to do that. So I think it's, just a really fine line. But one way that I think we're going to be able to do that is because if we are communicating with each other interdepartmentally and we are learning from each other, what behaviors are you dealing with? I've learned so much from Craig about what the public works has to deal with, that it's opened up my compassion too. I guess that's the only way I could answer that. So we keep trying. Yep.
So to complement what Kim said as well is, and she mentioned it, I'm just going to reinforce it a little bit, is that piece where we are working in partnership with police, with public works, with human services, and the approach is from a compassionate side of resource. What can we do to help? What can we do to assist? And what Kim says is our belief is that we can end this, and we can end this through these partnerships. And with doing that, it's the approach that we are going to come in and help, and we're going to provide that assistance and help the best we can in a way that they can hear it and the way that they can approach it themselves. Understanding that it is a partnership with enforcement when enforcement is necessary. And I know David's here, and I'll look for him to do this or this if I'm saying the wrong thing. But it's, enforcement is a piece of this, but also space. And that's, that with Craig at the table, talking about how we have our parks appear, how we utilize those parks, and it's all three of those pieces consistently. And now with the courts, and I'm looking,
Yeah.
I'm sure they're here someplace, but also with the courts of providing some type of response to those individuals that whatever we're doing isn't working, and an arrest is what occurs, is how do we then approach it after the arrest, before the court appearance, of saying, here's another opportunity to engage with us in services. What does that look like? And that's our partnership with, it's not Phoenix.
It's
Thank you.
Maricopa County. We have a program called Hand in Hand that we're beginning to work on, looking at working with people just for that purpose who are coming out of incarceration.
Question in the back?
City departments that you've identified that could aid in your collaborative partnerships and also help in these performance measures?
I think, as Paul said, we'll be working more and more with the court system, with community services, with the neighborhood services programs. I have even thought about what our arts could do for awareness of homelessness. And yeah, I don't think that there is a department that couldn't help, that we couldn't work with. Oh, the library, for instance, look at what we're doing at the library. I mean, we're attempting to have a library program to work with homeless people there. And we have a new bike program that's working, which is great. Now, our homeless folks who cannot take a library book out, they're going out together so that can happen. So the sky's the limit as to where and what we can do interdepartmentally.
So we get there.
Hi. I guess more my personal opinion that I kind of hope supports your perspective, and that's that I think there's a myth that if we provide these services that it'll attract more homeless people, and to some extent that'll grow the need or the services. But I think to some extent there's a finite population, and to your point that they really don't want to be homeless, whether they're chronic or young, that we can do something about that. And my concern is, there's any research or anything that we're aware of that really tells us this isn't something that's going to grow, or that there is a finite group of people that find themselves in this kind of transitional phase, that we can do something and be successful at this. I don't know if you can address that.
I can tell you that this is a question that many have asked. There is research that says that homeless people, just like the rest of us, want to stay and be where they have support systems. So they don't want to even come to Tempe from Mesa if their support systems are there. they grew up there, if they know the neighborhood there, they know how to get around. So there's that. That's just, but there is no evidence anywhere that that has happened, that when you have really great resources, that you're inundated with people coming to get them. There's nothing to support that. And what a great problem that would be to have. Honestly, because then let's work on that problem. Let's make other jurisdictions and other systems do their part if we're doing everything else so well.
Speaking for Kim, briefly, and she has said this again and again, this is a regional approach, this is a regional topic. And so it's one that there's efforts being made by Andrew currently in bringing in regional partners, but it's, since Kim has been here, it has been her topic of discussion is that we need to focus on this not as just a Tempe topic, but a regional topic. And we are very grateful to have her because of her relationships with MAG, with the Continuum of Care, and others to bring in that work, YMCA, et cetera. So
another question from the audience? Let me ask one that maybe is a bit unfair, but I'll do it anyway. Just kind of think about it in terms of the metrics and measurable outcomes. The goal is to end homelessness as defined by your presentation, sort of that functional zero, that if someone is homeless, it's going to be rare, brief, and one time. Given our current state of resources and what we currently have here in Tempe and in the region, how far away would you say if we did nothing in terms of altering both our direction, policy, and the amount of resources we spend annually, or are we away from achieving that functional zero?
We, Tempe, or the Maricopa County?
Well, let's start first with Tempe and then talk about the region.
I believe that if we really focused on the chronic population that is the most expensive to serve, the most difficult to serve, and successfully took them out of the equation, we would have all those resources available now to serve the people that would take a much lighter touch. And if we as a system then are really functioning as efficiently as possible, there's no reason why we couldn't take care of those people if we opened up our mind to some of these things.
Sure.
So I'm not convinced that it's just we need more financial resources. I think that we need to make commitments and prioritize things that are very difficult for people to do. And I understand that because I don't want 500 children experiencing homelessness, but I just keep thinking if we take this part out of the equation, so many more people will be helped. I don't know if that answers it. You want me to tell you how long that would take? Well, if everybody got on board, I bet you we could do it in 5 years in Tempe.
That's helpful. I mean, like I said, it was a bit of an unfair question. I was just trying to think about it in terms of why we do what we do here and the acceleration, because part of it is making, I think, a very honest assessment as to what are the barriers right now? What is it that's causing us not to be able to get closer to that functional zero place? And I think what you hit upon is, as I understand it, it's the amount of time, attentions, and current resources that we devote to, or that we should devote to the chronic homeless population.
And having housing outcomes for them.
Right. They're not the largest population necessarily,
No.
but they drive the most use of resources because they're more resistant to the sort of housing options and other things that perhaps other groups aren't as much. So
That's right.
that's the biggest hurdle, is to tackle that chronic population first.
And they're the ones that our community members, see. And then that becomes the face of homelessness, and it isn't the face of homelessness. So to me, again, that's another reason.
And then the second part of my question was to get to this idea of acceleration is, if we knew that, let's say 5 years was the number, and if that was, we wanted to see, a path that was less than that, what sort of things would we do differently? And that's the part where it gets interesting, because that has to do with the budget, discussions with council, prioritization of budget items. I know that in your presentation to council, you laid out sort of a multi-year plan in conjunction with Public Works and Police to kind of increase resources, staffing, dollars, to try to meet and get to where you're talking about. So that's the sort of thing that hopefully this group and the feedback that we're getting today and some of the questions, stimulating thoughts and conversations will help make this much more helpful and collaborative for you.
If I may, Andrew, briefly, and I know I will be as brief. Two examples I think might be helpful is for the group is to understand that we in Human Services aren't approaching this from a Pollyanna perspective. We understand the realities and the complexities and what makes this difficult. As example, again briefly, I'm at the gas station at Rural and Southern, right, with my daughter getting gas. And a gentleman comes up and approaches me in the gas station and he says, "How you doing?" I'm like, "I'm doing well. How you doing?" And he looks at me and says, "You know what? No one really ever asked me that." I said, "Well, I am. I'm asking you, how you doing today?" And so he presents his day, how he's doing, and he goes, "I'm not going to lie to you. I'm here to ask you for money." Okay, and I said, "Well, that's fine. I'm listening." And I said, "Just so you're aware, right across the street, on the second floor, at the library, there's people there that can help you right now if you'd like to go over there." All right? And so then the gentleman says, "Do you have food?" And I said, "Well, I don't have food on me right now, but we can guide you." Or I didn't own it. I'm in my personal attire, right? So I'm actually in jeans. Okay, so I'm in jeans. But in that, that's just stretch.
Trying to imagine.
That's a stretch, all right? But in that,
quite the vivid picture here.
It's an inside joke in my work environment of whether or not I wear jeans or not. But in that conversation, is I offered him, here's where we can go, here's where you can go, here's where you can get help. And his response was, "You know what, things are easier the way I'm doing it right now, and so I'm going to keep on doing that," right? So that goes to your point of those that don't want services. And you heard Kim's response of how we're trying to approach that. And we see it, all right? Kelly sees it every day. And the approach is that we are relentless. We don't stop with that initial interaction. We continue to go back. She continues to go back. So there's that example. The second example, brief, is that coming in here today, right? I'm walking in from the parking garage to here, right? And 6th Street Park, which I didn't even know it had a name, right? 6th Street Park, there are individuals there that are homeless, right? And so I'm walking like this, and I'm walking through, and I start approaching a gentleman, right? And I don't know why I'm even doing that, and I look up, and Kelly's coming from the other direction, right? And I'm like, okay, Kelly's got this. And so Kelly comes up, we have a brief interaction, and then she gets to work. And then we come down, we meet down here, I'm like, "So how'd it go?" And she goes, "This gentleman wanted service. This gentleman wanted to get into housing." All right? But there are barriers keeping him from that. And so I've got two different perspectives. The one, it's easier for me to stay the way I am, and one that I want, but I have barriers in my way. And our approach is, how do we identify, Kim's approach is, how do we identify ways to overcome those barriers and get them into housing, and that's what our job is. Right? And so the intention is to provide a reality check for all of you to understand that we are not sitting behind areas thinking that everyone wants services and it's easy. We hear the same things. We see the same things. And our approach is that we have to be relentless and stay at it until we can get to what Kim is talking about, is no one really wants to be living in a park waiting for the sprinklers to come on, hoping that they're not going to get abused by someone else, in a place that's not habitable. And so that's our job with this approach, to make that end. So.
One more thing, Andrew.
Sure.
We need housing. And that's not just the city of Tempe's responsibility, but we need people to advocate to the state and to the federal government that we need housing, affordable housing.
All right. You handled my unfair question very well. Thank you. All right. Congratulations. Well done. Thank you all for coming here this afternoon. If you have questions or additional feedback for either of the groups today, feel free to reach out and offer that to them. I know they would welcome it. We also have sheets in the back for written comments. Okay, they're right in the back. If you want to grab one, you don't have to fill it out today. Just send it through, either to Rosa's office, or even, is that where you want it to go? Back to you, or to... All right. We also have cookies.